Okay, everyone, I think we'll begin the evening while more people join us. I'd like to first thank you all for joining us to celebrate the 146th birthday of Sir Winston Churchill, and I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving. My name is Justin Reash. I'm the Executive Director of the International Churchill Society and Program Director of the National Churchill Leadership Center at George Washington University. I'm joined tonight by two great guests. The first is Tim Riley, the Sandra L. and Monroe E. Trout, Director and Chief Curator of America's National Churchill Museum at Westminster College. Thank you for joining us, Tim.
Well, thank you, Justin.
We're also joined by Gail Rosseau, who's a clinical professor of neurosurgery at the School of Medicine and Health Sciences at George Washington University and a long-time friend of the Society. Thanks for joining us, Gail.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. And as you know, Justin, part of the reason why I love Churchill so much is because we share a birthday.
That's right. And a happy birthday to you as well, Gail.
Thank you.
Before we begin, I wanted to let all attendees know that we are recording this event and it will be available to watch for free on our YouTube page in the coming days. Also, Tim, Gail, and I will be answering some of your questions later in the evening. So please use the Q&A function for Zoom to submit questions, and we will hopefully be able to answer one of yours. So to kick us off, we'll be watching recorded remarks by leaders on both sides of the Atlantic to celebrate Sir Winston's birthday. The Society thanks all of those who sent in a video of their well wishes, and we are grateful for their participation. And hopefully you all are able to have a glass of Pol Roger champagne with you this evening. And I wanted to let you know that once you see Jenny Churchill and Lawrence Geller on the video, which is about 10 minutes in, please have your glass ready as they will be doing the official toast. I'd also like to thank the Pol Roger Champagne House, along with their president, Laurent Dorcourt, for sponsoring this event and for their special part in promoting Churchill's legacy. So without further ado, I'm going to play this video. Give me one moment, please.
Hello. On behalf of the United States Congress, it is a privilege to send warm greetings to Randolph Churchill, Ambassador Karen Pierce, and the International Churchill Society as we celebrate the 146th birthday of a titan of democracy, Sir Winston Churchill. While the coronavirus crisis prevents us from toasting Churchill in person this year, I look forward to hosting you all again at the Capitol soon. For 52 years, the International Churchill Society has been a powerful voice for keeping Churchill's vision and values alive, a legacy that continues through its partnership with the National Churchill Leadership Center at George Washington University. It is fitting that the Society's membership spans the entire globe, as Churchill rightly belongs to the world that he helped save from tyranny. Yet Churchill will always hold a special place in the American memory. Born to an American mother, Churchill once joked that in another world, he might have been a member of Congress. Instead, we proudly display his bust in the Capitol. And in my office, I have a photo of Churchill addressing Congress for the first time. You can see my father, Thomas D'Alessandro, then a member from Baltimore, seated in the chamber. Just 19 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Churchill was delivering a dose of his legendary resolve to the Congress, newly at war. His call to action stirred the hearts and inspired the admiration of all Americans and galvanized our two nations to fight for liberty. Churchill was truly a giant whose steadfast voice, defiant spirit, and brilliant leadership were a beacon of hope and determination for all those dedicated to the promise of freedom. May Winston Churchill's memory serve as an example of courage and selfless service across the generations and throughout the ages.
Winston Churchill was the greatest British statesman of all time and the best friend America ever had. By the time President Kennedy named him an honorary American citizen in 1963, We already considered him one of our own, and not just because his mother was an American. Churchill saw in America the exceptionalism that we see in ourselves. From a young age, he read our books. He revered President Lincoln. He studied our history, our laws, and our Constitution, which he described as America's enduring source of strength. So please join me in toasting one of the greatest men in history on his 146th birthday. Here's to a man whose bravery, charity, valor, and wit kept the torch of inspiration lit in freedom's darkest hour.
Thank you to Lawrence Geller, the chairman of the International Churchill Society, for inviting me to speak at this exceptional event in honor of the great Anglo-American Sir Winston Churchill. It is indeed a privilege to be here alongside the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, with your very special ties, Madam Speaker, to this event, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, and Sir Winston Churchill's great-granddaughter, Jenny Churchill, on what would have been Sir Winston's 146th birthday. Good evening to everybody. In the words of Sir Winston, we not only speak the same language, we think the same thoughts. And I'm reliably informed that the key to a successful speech on this special occasion is to pepper it liberally with quotations from one of the greatest orators of the 20th century. And there is certainly plenty to choose from. During his lifetime, Winston Churchill put more words to paper than Shakespeare and Dickens combined. That's according to British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who's something of an expert on these things, and especially Churchillian things. He also had a knack of placing his words in just the right order for maximum effect. Nearly 75 years ago in Fulton, Missouri, Churchill made a speech that's lived on in history, both in how it characterized our adversaries and how it characterized our closest ally. On 5th of March 1946, Churchill coined the phrase, the special relationship, giving new status to the friendship between the US and the UK that had just become the bedrock of freedom and justice around the world. At that time, Churchill had only recently been defeated for re-election as Prime Minister, but his words struck a chord. Sir Winston Churchill's influence on the transatlantic relationship is still present today as that relationship continues to grow and evolve. The shared values that are at the core of the US-UK alliance. In Churchill's words, all the greatest things are simple, and many can be expressed in a single word: freedom, justice, honour, duty, mercy, and hope. The special relationship between Britain and America is the deepest, most successful, and most advanced of any two countries in the world. As close allies in NATO, permanent members of the Security Council, and leading nuclear powers, our cooperation is vital to international peace and security. Given his overwhelming focus on the defence of the realm, Churchill would have been very supportive of the defence funding increase the Prime Minister announced yesterday of over $21 billion. We retain our ambition to be one of the world's finest armed forces alongside our US allies in war and in peace. We're also each other's biggest investors, creating high-skilled jobs and stimulating investment. We share the world's largest bilateral foreign direct investment partnerships, and of course we share a mutual interest in tourism as well. When Churchill coined the phrase special relationship, the world had just united against an evil that threatened our freedom and way of life. Now, 75 years later, we find ourselves uniting again to battle a global pandemic. We're already seeing the success of our combined efforts to create a vaccine, but even once we've beaten the virus, there will be further challenges. Global economies will need to be strengthened, a priority for the UK as we take on the role of G7 chair in 2021, and it will be a big challenge for our two nations. Above all, we need to forge a common purpose in tackling new challenges, whether posed by transformative technology like AI or strategic competition from the likes of Russia and China. The outcome of that has to be what Churchill always advocated: freedom and open societies. Today's threats may look different from those Churchill faced, but collaboration and partnership are as vital as ever. As a government, we look forward to working with President-elect Biden, Vice President-elect Harris, and with members of both parties in the House and Senate over the next 4 years. And I'm excited to see what the next chapter in the great friendship of our two nations has in store. We look forward to forging new ties and renewing old ones. As Churchill said, it's wonderful what great strides can be made when there's a resolute purpose behind them. I have the utmost confidence as ambassador that the partnership between America and Britain will continue to go from strength to strength as we address challenges together, ensuring our countries are safer, more prosperous, and are both bastions of democracy and human rights. To end, here we are together, defending all that to free men is dear. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I've just come from speaking to the New England Churchillians. So to any of that group, I apologise, as my remarks may now contain a little repetition. But don't worry, you got the full-length version. Justin has asked me to comment on notable Churchill birthdays. And as almost everything Churchill did was notable, you won't be surprised to learn that many of his birthdays were too. And let's start with his actual birthday, 30th of November, 1874, 146 years ago today. Churchill did not arrive quietly. He was early, several weeks premature, the labour brought on by a fall and then exacerbated by a rough ride in a pony cart. This meant that nothing was ready, and he had to be attended to by the local doctor and to be dressed in borrowed clothes. If the accounts of those around him in later life are all to be believed, this was probably the only occasion on which Churchill was ever early. He also arrived in the middle of the night at about 1:30 a.m. and of course remained a night owl thereafter. And the birth took place at Blenheim Palace, the ancestral seat of Churchill's grandfather, the 7th Duke of Marlborough. Churchill was always easily satisfied with the best. Blenheim was founded for the first Duke, John Churchill, in recognition of his generalship during the wars of the Spanish Succession in the 18th century. It was no doubt this sense of history and lineage that inspired Churchill to embark on his own army career, joining the Victorian cavalry and seeing action for the first time around the time of his 21st birthday in Cuba. And when a chestnut horse was struck by a bullet just a few yards from him, he commented, "As I watched these proceedings, I could not help reflecting that the bullet which had struck the chestnut had certainly passed within a foot of my head. So at any rate, I had been under fire. That was something. Nevertheless, I began to take a more thoughtful view of our enterprise than I had hitherto done." His 69th birthday was spent in Tehran at the first wartime summit of the Big Three in 1943. There was a cake and candles and much drinking and toasting. Swords and ice cream bombs were dropped. But perhaps the most Churchillian birthday of all was his 80th, celebrated in Westminster Hall at the heart of the British Parliament, the place where Churchill had spent so much of his life. He was back as Prime Minister, and he was dead set against retiring, not yet ready to give in, which makes the choice of parliamentary gift even more shocking. A warts and all portrait by Graham Sutherland, one that Churchill hated and which Clementine ultimately destroyed. So how did he respond on the day? Well, first of all, by describing it as a remarkable example of modern art, and then by making one of his greatest post-war speeches. And he said, "I was very glad that Mr. Attlee described my speeches in the war as expressing the will not only of Parliament, but of the whole nation. Their will was resolute and remorseless, and as it proved, unconquerable. It fell to me to express it, and if I found the right words, you must remember that I have always earned my living by my pen and by my tongue. It was the nation and race dwelling all around the globe that had the lion heart. I had the luck to be called upon to give the roar. I also hope that I sometimes suggested to the lion the right places to use his claws." That, ladies and gentlemen, is the man we're celebrating tonight. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone from the United Kingdom. I am Jenny Churchill, great-granddaughter of Sir Winston Churchill. Joining me is Lawrence Geller, Chairman of the International Churchill Society. On behalf of the Churchill family and the International Churchill Society, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us this evening to celebrate Sir Winston's birthday. I'd specifically like to thank Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Representative Kevin McCarthy, and Her Majesty's Ambassador to United States, Dame Karen Pierce, for not only continuing this great tradition, but for their enthusiasm and support. Above all, for their participation in this annual event, albeit out of necessity, it is virtual this year. Although 2020 has been one of the most challenging years in recent memory, amidst all of the heartaches and incredible challenges we all face, I am pleased that we can all be here to celebrate Churchill's memory. I know we'd all prefer to be together in the United States Capitol enjoying this evening. We hope to be able to do so in 2021. I am proud to represent the Churchill family in supporting the work of the Society, and I would like to ask Lawrence Geller to make a few remarks.
On November the 30th, 2024, we'll be celebrating the 150th anniversary of Churchill's birthday. Despite the passage of time, his relevance, legacy, and lessons continue to be increasingly impactful today. As longtime chairman of the International Churchill Society, I'm gratified how, in these troubled and uncertain times, so many have turned to his words, actions, and life for inspiration, education, hope, leadership, and, above all, courage. We should never forget that he felt that courage is the first of human qualities because it is the quality that guarantees all others. This year, our society launched its first ever Inspire Like Churchill competition, which saw over 600 participants submit a speech or record a video that described how Churchill's never give in spirit inspired them in life. Amongst the winners was young Zach de Boulay, who's overcome so much adversity in his life. He donated his winning award of $5,000 to Great Ormond Street Hospital for Sick Children. Thank you, Zach, for inspiring all of us with your courage and your determination. And we know that Churchill will always daily inspire you. You can see Zach's and every other winner's entry by going to www.winstonchurchill.org. Recently, we hosted our first virtual conference, which welcomed over 4,000 participants from more than 60 countries. It was an incredible turnout, and we'll build on that success for our next conference in the fall of 2021, which we hope will be both in person and virtual in London.
Our gratitude to you all for participating today, and with your generous support and help, we will continue to engage the current and future generations on the lessons of my great-grandfather's legacy and continue to inspire leaders across the globe. Now, without further ado, let us celebrate not only a great man, but a life well lived to the full. So, following his example, it is only appropriate to ask you to please raise a glass of his favourite champagne, Paul Roger, and join me in toasting the immortal memory of Sir Winston Churchill.
Sir Winston Churchill.
Sir Winston.
Sir Winston.
Bonsoir from Épernay, headquarter of Champagne Paul Roger, headquarter of the house which was very dear to the heart of Sir Winston. One of the best places, at least one of the best cellars to find the champagne to toast to Sir Winston for this very special day. Sir Winston has been a very loyal and fantastic ambassador for Champagne Paul Roger. He was a big fan of our vintages. As early as 1908, he was already enjoying and drinking vintage 1895. After that, he has been drinking and selecting always the best vintages of Maison Paul Roger. 1914, 1921, 1928, which is a vintage he has been opening to celebrate the end of the war. After the end of the war, he met with Odette Paul Roger, who was the face of Paul Roger at the time, at a dinner at the British Embassy in Paris. From that time started a very long friendship between the Churchill family and the Paul Roger family. A few years later, Sir Winston Churchill has been naming one of his fillies, Paul Roger, his racing horse, who has been winning a race at the time of the Coronation Stakes in 1953. When Sir Winston died in 1965, Paul Roger decided to put a black border on the edge of the label of the vintages shipped to the UK as a tribute to Sir Winston. 10 years after he died, the Paul Roger family has been asking to the Churchill family if they would be pleased with a cuvée named after him. That was the birth of the cuvée, produced in magnums on the vintage 75, and the idea was to reproduce a style of champagne Sir Winston would have loved if he was still alive. This cuvée has been presented at Blenheim in June 1984, 40 years after D-Day, and this cuvée has been acclaimed at the time as the most amazing prestige cuvée of the modern time. Nowadays, we still produce this cuvée with the vintage 2009, which we have been presenting to the Churchill family at the end of last year. We got the blessing of the family for the 18th time, and we continue to celebrate the life and the achievement of Sir Winston Churchill each time we open a bottle. It is a great privilege for us to have this very special relationship with the family, and I couldn't resist in this very odd year, very special year, to finish with the word of Sir Winston: "We shall never surrender." To Sir Winston, to our friends from America, thank you very much. Have a great evening. Cheers.
Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that as much as we did. It's incredible the amount of goodwill that Sir Winston continues to generate across the globe. And I would like to thank Speaker Pelosi, Minority Leader McCarthy, Dame Karen Pierce, Jenny Churchill, Lawrence Geller, Alan Packwood, and Laurent from Paul Roger for participating in this event, albeit virtually. And I think Laurent really summed it up great when he said we will never surrender at the end of those videos. So now we're going to begin the live discussion. And what we already introduced, Gail and Tim. I would first like to ask Tim, who has been the director at America's National Churchill Museum for many years now, about how he has, and Tim, I'm speaking to you now, so I'll stop referring to you in a third person. How have you, since you took over, and we actually have a great question from Jay in the Q&A speaking about COVID-19, so maybe you can discuss this as well. But how are you engaging with the young students at Westminster College? And as we all know, and as Dame Karen Pierce referenced, Westminster College has a long history with Winston Churchill. So what are the ways that you are continuing to engage with them to promote his legacy?
Well, thanks, Justin. And I echo, first of all, your thanks to all of the participants and those great words that preceded our live discussion. It's terrific to see so many people raise a glass and salute Winston Churchill. I think Dame Karen pointed out that the term special relationship was really something Churchill believed in from an early age, but it was a phrase he coined in the Iron Curtain speech here at Westminster College in 1946. And our own relationship, the museum's relationship and Westminster College's relationship with the next generation began shortly thereafter. The students in the historic gymnasium here in Fulton who heard Winston Churchill give the Sinews of Peace speech never forgot it. The few that are still around and remember it are still in touch with us. We've captured their oral archives and our history here. They're part of us, and their stories continue to be a part of us. So I think it begins with the student population, and that's critically important. Churchill himself said, "Study history. Study history. In history lie all the secrets of statecraft." And I think that's important for any student of here at Westminster College or student at any other college, university, elementary, primary school, or student of life, is to look to the past, to be inspired by the lessons of the past. Churchill knew that. He was the chief advocate for that. And in terms of engaging the next generation, interestingly enough, here at Westminster College, we began to engage the next generations of Churchills, the family. Few people realize it, but the year after Winston Churchill was here, Randolph, his son, came to speak and visit here at Westminster College. And then over the years, we had Sarah Churchill and Mary Soames, who was a great patron of this place, visit on many occasions. And then the next generations, Jenny, who has been here, her brother Randolph, Jack has been here. The Nicholas Soames was here to dedicate the museum 50 years ago. Emma Soames was here with us last year. The next generation of Churchills have been engaged with this place. And most importantly, they too, and this really needs to be emphasized, the family support of the International Churchill Society and of America's National Churchill Museum continues to engage the next generation. The students here who meet them and meet the world leaders who still make the pilgrimage to Fulton to speak, engage with these next generation and inspire them. Not only are the words informational, but they're inspirational. And I think a place like this and a society like the International Churchill Society continues to do that. We've been in the business for 50 years. Longer if you count the speech at 75, but the museum's been here for 50 years, and touching not only historians but political scientists, those engaged in English literature, history, art. There's so many touch points to connect to Winston Churchill, and it's something that I think we have to do because the lessons of leadership, of vision, of looking back to inform the present and build a better future are all great Churchillian traits, and it's something that we've continuously done since Churchill came 75 years ago. It truly is a special relationship with the next generation.
For sure, Tim. And for those who don't know, America's National Churchill Museum has an incredible collection of Churchilliana. And Tim, if you don't mind me putting on the spot, before people logged on, you showed us a great piece in the collection of Paul Roget, which is incredibly timely. Can you show us that box of that you have?
Oh, sure. More than one bottle of Paul Roget has been uncorked here in Fulton over the years. And this is a box from the 1985 vintage. We have a lot of bottles in the collection. Most of them are empty, but they're in the collection, and they've been used by luminaries who've come here to visit and toast. And we have a special spot in the vault for the bottles. So Paul Roget is definitely the champagne of choice at Westminster College.
Of course. And I appreciated you discussing how Churchill's legacy impacts all types of areas of study and in industry. And I'm so glad, Gail, you're joining us tonight, because you are a neurosurgeon. Not a typical area of study, if you will, for many people who engage with Winston Churchill. But can you tell us, how does his legacy, how does his impact inspire you and inspire your your colleagues, and also how you engage with students at George Washington, where we're of course colleagues.
Right. Well, thank you, Justin. You're absolutely right that it does not seem as if Churchill would be a natural for the medical profession, but I assure you that he is. And in fact, in the last 6 months, we've had meetings, virtual meetings, of course, in Malaysia, Bolivia, San Diego, and most recently in Rabat, Morocco, neurosurgical meetings where Churchill was quoted. And it's a very common thing within our profession to follow him and to be sort of an aficionado of Churchill. And I think that's because there are so many people in medicine in general, neurosurgery in particular, who admire his leadership, his resilience, and in these days, his mindfulness. Yes, his mindfulness. They didn't call it that in his time, but indeed it was. And so I think for our students, faculty, and staff at George Washington, we're very lucky to have the National Churchill Leadership Center right there on campus. And I frequently remind my colleagues, whether they be students or faculty, that we're only a few blocks away at any given time from the National Churchill Center, where we can see some artifacts such as his daily planner from the war era. You can, if you're a student of any discipline, sit in there, study what you need to for your classes, but be inspired by this amazing leader. So, you know, if you look at the students who attend George Washington University, there's something in Churchill for everyone. I mean, it seems obvious the connections, as Dr. Riley mentioned, with history, or at our Elliott School of Public Policy, at our terrific law school. Those are natural places where one would seek out the example of Churchill. But I've already mentioned in medicine, he is a legacy that we all cling to and look to. And in fact, I give a talk to medical students on Winston Churchill and the art of resilience. There is a necessity to be resilient in medicine. And then of course, his art. You know, I tell students at the Corcoran School, you may not realize that someone who wrote more words than Shakespeare and Dickens combined actually also painted more than 500 beautiful paintings. So in fact, he said that he couldn't live without painting. He couldn't stand the pressure, right? He just couldn't bear it. And so there are so many things about this polyvalent man that continue to inspire us today. And I think biography is one of those things that gives us each an example of a human who has qualities we can admire and incorporate those qualities into our own lives.
Yeah, Gail, I'm so glad you mentioned resiliency, as all three of us work at universities. You know, we've all seen over the past few years the increase of student stress, and whether that be stress put onto themselves to do well, or the stress of deciding a major and deciding a career. And I think you hit the nail on the head with Winston Churchill, such a multifaceted man who, of course, made his money through writing and journalism, who made his legacy mostly through politics. But you look one way and you say, oh my gosh, his inspiration from a certain part of him inspired people decades later, like with the President W. Bush, who took his own painting up after the presidency and was inspired by Winston Churchill. It's really important for us as leaders at these universities to really show students that yes, of course, he's known for his politics, and he's known for his great speeches, and he's known for leading the country through the Blitz and through World War II. But there was so much more before that, and of course after that, that developed him and kept him going. From your own personal professional perspective, you know, resiliency within student body, is that something that you focus on, and how do you encourage your students to learn from his example, if you will, to be more resilient?
You know, there's so many things about Churchill's life that teach resilience. And if we only think of him as the victorious leader of World War II, we miss so much of him. He was a lonely child. He pined for his parents who just were too busy for him, and he became a very good parent himself as a result of that. He was not a good student. In fact, he was so poor that that's one of the reasons why he was not allowed to take Greek and Latin with the other good students. And thank God he didn't, because he devoted himself to English. And we know the great results of that. And for anyone who's been disappointed in applying to college or graduate school, we'll take the example of Churchill, who had to apply 3 times before he got into Sanders. So there are so many things that led him to say, if you're going through hell, keep going. And I think, and also he was funny. The things, he was really funny, and the things that he was funny about hold now, you know, as we celebrate his 146th birthday. There are classic Churchillisms that bear repeating, even though we often know what the punchline is, because they are just classics. And so for a new generation, I encourage them, pick up a book of his jokes and his witticisms, because they really translate very well to the common moment.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned his witticisms and, you know, his quips. And Alan Packwood in his remarks, as we saw earlier, mentioned one of my favorite, which was his response to Graham Sutherland's portrait of, I'm paraphrasing, a great example of modern art, which is just so, I mean, you know, I don't mean to speak on Graham Sutherland's behalf, but that must have cut so deep for a truly wonderful artist, as we all know. Tim, we have, and by the way, I wanted to thank everyone who is submitting questions. We have quite a few. Tim, for someone who is working with students on a daily basis on Westminster College's campus, and with it and at the museum, how has COVID-19 affected how you can engage with students, and have you seen any of that resiliency in specific about how they continue to work at the museum, and how you can take your exhibitions and collection to the students in this time of uncertainty?
Well, you know, I think the world changed for all of us in March. You know, when in one form or fashion we were shut down, locked down, closed, and that was true here too. We closed our doors temporarily on March 15th, and we had to quickly pivot. We were resilient. We were clever in the ways of trying to find ways to engage our students. So digitized materials, old lectures, old vintage archival material that needed to be digitized. We scrambled. We rang the bell, and the students answered. They were out there out front with the new technologies and digitization efforts, making old videos and lectures available online, because suddenly the world was behind a screen. And with the museum closed, if you wanted to find Churchill content, they had to go online and engage in ways that demanded digital media. So our students really quickly answered the call and helped us in that digitization effort, worked with the collection in the museum when it was safe to do so. We've actually accelerated the pace of our cataloging backlog of collection material. And, you know, that is exciting. You know, for an undergraduate, Westminster is an undergraduate only institution, to be able to handle original speeches and documents and letters. If you're not hooked on history after looking at the correspondence between Harry Truman and Winston Churchill, you'll never be. And you know, that type of access is something that, you know, COVID is all the horrible things that have been caused by COVID that allowed us to really focus on that with renewed efforts. And you know, that it's one of the silver linings out of the great cloud of COVID that came, and our students helped us lead the way.
Yeah. I'd like to jump in there too.
Go ahead, Gail.
I do think that's a really important element, this notion that if you think about Churchill and you only think about history, it may seem fusty or not related to the present time. But I think that looking at his life and realizing that studying his life enhances our own, because he had a sense of his place in the world, just as we must all have. So the things that I learn when I read about him, and incidentally, he's someone who there continues to be a book a month written about this man, who has died in 1965, and yet he's like Lincoln in the sense that there is so much that we can mine from these great minds because of their great humanity. And I think studying them, really enjoying learning about them, enhances our own lives. You think about how he reacted to a letter from a child, and you realize I should be recognizing the historic nature of that letter, that comment, this thing in my own life. We've just gone through big elections. We're going through an event of monumental proportions, this global pandemic. My children asked their grandfather, my 90-year-old father, about the biggest things that have happened in his life. He's lived through a lot of world events. He said, it's right now. It's this pandemic. There's been nothing like it in the last 90 years. So recognizing that we are all living through a historic time and doing those things that historic times demand. And everyone will answer that question a little bit differently, whether they preserve things or use it as a pivot point or inflection point. But recognizing the value of history in our own lives, to me, comes back whether we're reading a biography of Winston Churchill or the memoirs of Barack Obama or anything in between.
Yeah,
Right.
great. Go ahead, Tim, please.
Really, really important, Gail, what you said. And I find it, I was having a conversation with a student here the other day, and we came to the conclusion together, that if history seems old, we're not doing our job. History has to be new and alive. And as you mentioned, so many books are published about Churchill and his era. It's a vibrant topic. And when the spark goes off, and that connection is made, that history is not something that's delegated to the dusty shelves in the back room or the archive, but can be made relevant. Churchill lived through a pandemic, and what did he say about that? What can we learn about that? And we need to get the books off the library shelves here and dig into it. And that's exactly what's being done, because we can learn from those lessons. And it's an exciting thing to see when those lights go off.
Yeah. Oh, I think so too. I mean, he even offers the quintessential put down, in this era of tweets and sound bites that characterize our not so nice politics. Churchill could at least be counted on to say of a colleague, he's a very modest man with much to be modest about. You have to appreciate the wit. Yeah. Not just nasty, and so there are just so many things about him that lighten and enliven and educate in our daily lives.
Of course, and I we have 15 minutes left. I'd like to start answering some of the many questions that we received. I first off would like to say we have attendees around the world. Erica is from Halifax, Nova Scotia. Hi, Erica. So one of the questions here, which I think would be great for both of you to answer. I think this is a fun little personal question on the books that Churchill wrote. So Buck Baker asks, can you highlight a book that Churchill wrote in particular, which you recommend for somebody to read for the first time? And I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but I'm going to put Tim on the spot.
Painting is a pastime. It's a slim volume. It was first published as 2 essays in 1921, published in book form in 1948. And it's, I think, one of his most personal accounts of all the words he wrote. As Gail indicated earlier, painting for Churchill was something he said he could not live without. And it rescued him. He said, it came to my rescue. it's a deeply personal and very easy read. As you mentioned, Justin, it inspired President Bush, W. Bush, to pick up a paintbrush, and so many others, world leaders, CEOs, students, read that essay, look at Churchill's paintings and pick them up. And that is, as Gail knows full well, an act of mindfulness. I mean, you look at a blank canvas, and for Churchill, it slowed the world down, and he could look and observe, and it's all there in painting as a pastime. So that's my recommendation.
I agree. And another thing he says in Painting as a Pastime is that when you are a painter, it imbues added joy and discernment in every walk and ride. So this is what we call mindfulness now, right? But you look at light and shadow and color and shape differently. So the painting enhanced his life, and it also allowed him to be able to do his profession. But I would choose a different book. I would choose The Dream. I love The Dream.
Yes.
That is also a slim volume, and it's a good starter. I've always related to Churchill as this, initially little boy who just wanted to please his parents. He said of his mother, I loved her like a star, twinkling but from afar. And he felt even more so about his father, who of course died when he was just 21 years old. And so in The Dream, Churchill imagines that he is painting, and this figure comes to life, and he has a conversation with someone who is his father. His father doesn't know it's him, and he wants so much to be able to tell his father that he's done well, that he's acceded to high office. He became, he even advanced farther than his father had. His father, who was often very critical of him and said he didn't think he would amount to much. And, can't we all relate to that feeling of wanting to please our parents and please the people who knew us when we were young and didn't know anything and couldn't do anything? So I think that's a beautiful volume as well. And along with Painting as a Pastime, I think those are two good starters because they really show his humanity.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say The Dream as well. It's an incredible, almost surreal. I mean, it is surreal. It's a surreal account, and you feel his humanity incredibly deeply. So I thank you for saying that. I do want to end. Go ahead.
Because it's appropriate to today, and that's the Malacan Field Force from 1898. Only because he mentioned champagne, and I think in a festive day like today, I should quote here that he says in Malacan Field Force, "A single glass of champagne imparts a feeling of exhilaration. The nerves are braced, the imagination agreeably stirred, the wits become more nimble. A bottle produces the contrary effect." So even in 1898, he was realizing the merits of champagne, but in moderation.
Yeah, cheers to that, Tim. Thank you.
Cheers. And how about what you said about FDR, famously relating to champagne? And I loved it. I mean, he clearly loved FDR and said meeting him was like opening a bottle of champagne. And what a nice compliment to give anyone.
That's incredible. I'd like to answer quickly a question by Jeff Barker, if he's still on. He asked, the president of Paul Roget noted a tribute to WSC on the labels of Paul Roget. What is the tribute? The tribute was a black banner that on the label that they applied for that vintage. I would only imagine that is an incredibly expensive vintage this day. One great question that I saw, and excuse me, I'm just scrolling through these real quick.
And follow up while you're looking.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Was there to commemorate in mourning the passing of Churchill, and I believe in the 1980s it would change to blue, so a blue banner to reflect his time at the Admiralty. So you'll see.
Oh, interesting.
With black, you'll see some of the newers with blue, and as I say, we have a couple bottles in the collection. So we know these things.
Of course. Tim, very quickly, there's a question from, I can't make out the name, but he wants to know how the renovation's coming of the church.
Oh, that's a great question. Well, we took the closure in March as an opportunity to accelerate some of the preservation efforts. I mean, as some of you know, the museum is located here in a bunker kind of underground beneath Christopher Wren's St. Mary the Virgin Aldermanbury, which was bombed in the Blitz 80 years ago in London and left for ruins, and stone by stone moved by Westminster College from central London to mid-Missouri as a tribute to the Iron Curtain speech. And it's been here for 50 years and in need of a nip and tuck. So we've had crews of conservationists, preservationists, building trenches and taking water away. And to answer the question, it's coming along very well. We've got more work to do, but we've made a good dent in some of the preservation and conservation efforts, which will be ongoing into the new year. We've left the lights on in the church, even though we're closed. It kind of glows. We call it the beacon of resilience. Even though we're closed, the lights are on so dimly, and as you walk by, it's a constant reminder that this church that's been around for centuries, bombed in the Blitz, like Churchill, is resilient, and we're still here. So thanks for asking.
Yeah, and I will clarify, the person who asked that is the famous Randy Otto, who does an incredible job of acting as Churchill, if you know him from Milwaukee. Hi, Randy. So with only a few minutes left, we have a great question from Pesaurus. It's a long question, but the gist is, how are the current lack of history that are given to contemporary students at universities, specifically those not in the humanities? He's commenting that he has an economic degree, and he thought the students are poorer because of their lack of economic history and the history of economic thought. If I could ask you both to just think about how the humanities specifically, and through understanding, Winston Churchill, is always commenting on as understanding the great man theory of history, but how do humanities augment the study of STEM and non-humanities? And I'll start with you, Gail, as someone in the medical field.
Yeah, and I'm so glad to field a question about economics, because we've just published a paper on diversity in neurosurgery. So you'd think it would have nothing to do with economics or Churchill, and yet it had to do with both. And in that paper, we looked hard at the Nobel Prize in 1990 that was awarded for the area of portfolio diversification. And there have been many famous and not so famous economists since that time, but it now seems fairly obvious that your chance of increasing return on investment and also protecting against threat is best when you diversify your portfolio. And these are things that we're making as lessons from other disciplines for why a profession like neurosurgery should be more diverse and should reflect better the patient population that we serve. And Churchill was very good at this notion of being your own chairman of your own board of education and bringing in experts from every discipline to educate yourself, from Professor Lindemann, who was his science guy, but in so many other areas. And so I think that this is one of the things that students now are able to do in a much more robust way than we ever could. You don't need to receive the accepted wisdom from your professor. You take that, but then you have this entire internet of thought, and you can bounce what you've received in lecture or in your reading against everyone else in the world and become the chairman of your own board of education. And that is as important in the humanities as it is in the sciences, and they actually need to intersect and cross-pollinate for maximum advantage to the human race and protection of the planet.
Hear, hear. Gail, that's spot on, and especially to hear it coming from a scientist and someone in the medical profession like yourself. Churchill was fascinated by science, and not only surrounded himself by the prof and others, dabbled in it himself. Spoke about evolution, wrote about aliens and extraterrestrial life, and speculated on, what it would take to have life on other planets. Things that are still very relevant today, and it's another great approach. The questioner asked about economics. I would not, however, advise studying economics through Churchill. That was not his strong suit.
At least not personal finances.
Correct. But otherwise, it's a good. He's a great person to look to.
That's a great comment, Tim. As Gail knows, there's a new book coming out on Churchill's illnesses, and one of the illnesses the authors discuss is when he gets hit by a car on Fifth Avenue. I think it's 1930 or 31, excuse me for not knowing off the top of my head, but he was in New York to embark on a lecture tour to make up for the money that he had lost in the stock market crash of 29, and thus gets out of a car going to see Bernard Baruch. I believe he looks the wrong way because being from England. Exactly. But what's interesting about our discussion regarding his fascination with science, the authors discussed the letters he was writing back and forth with Professor Lindemann, and he asked Professor Lindemann, "Can you calculate the amount of force that my body took by that car?" Because he wanted to then promote it on his speaking tour to show that he was able to withstand such a hit. I'm gonna end our discussion here. I greatly appreciate both of your time, and we all appreciate the attendees' time. And if like I said, this is being recorded, so please feel free to watch it later on our YouTube page. And wishing you both a wonderful end of year and happy holidays, and of course the attendees as well. And please and happy birthday to Sir Winston Churchill, and cheers, Gail. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you both for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
Be with you. To Sir Winston.
To Sir Winston.
And
take care, everyone.
Being again together in person soon.
That's right, of course. Well, take care, and we'll speak soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye now.